Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton, and today we're talking about the other Data Life deck. A lot of attention has been given, and rightfully so, to the 8 standby build. Some people building choice standby. There's a lot of really good stuff with the new Data Life, stuff that is clearly top of the meta. But if you bought into Data Live, you've got a lot of yellow and blue sitting around that you might not be doing anything with, and there are some really fun cards, some really interesting interactions, and definitely a lot of playable stuff in it. So that's what this is. This is the deck made from everything else that is good in Data Live. So if you bought your playset or your cases, this is a chance to use those cards to build something that's fun and good. And if you want to get into Data Live but you don't feel like tracking down $60 Kurumis, this might be the deck for you. The object of the deck is to build resources throughout the mid-game, building up to one of the most explosive endgames you're going to see, a burn 5 that is very expensive, but if it works, it can basically win the game by itself. This is reasonably competitive. It's not as good in the competitive meta as the other Data Live stuff, but anything that can burn 5 with any kind of consistency like this can, and we'll get into the details of how that works in a bit, at least has a chance to win games, especially because the level 1 combo, the choice combo in this deck, is one of the most consistent plussing combos that English has ever seen. It's not unreasonable at all to plus 5 or 6 cards off of this combo at level 1 and have a full hand for the rest of the game. Obviously, when you're spending a lot of resources into a big swing for 5, if you hit it, that's fantastic. If you don't, you spend a lot of resources to get nothing. So high risk, high reward here, but if it works, it wins a lot of games, and it's reasonably competitive. I have the cost listed as medium for this deck, although it tops out at around $300, mostly because if you're willing to wait a little bit, the prices for some of the more expensive cards in this deck are going to come down, I think. Data Live sold really well, and while I think a lot of these cards will probably come down just because they're not in the meta list, I think even the relatively few chase cards that are in this deck will also come down to a certain extent. In the same way that we saw Legend of Crimson when it dropped at the end of last year, a lot of pretty expensive cards on release, but those prices have consistently gone down over the last several months just because of how much product was opened. There will be a lot of these cards running around, and I think that that's going to bring down the price of the stuff that isn't the top-end chase stuff like the Kurumi level 3 or the SPs. The deck itself is pretty straightforward. It wins by building resources with its +2 combo. It runs 8 plussing triggers with choice and pants. And then at the end, it's a big swing, pay 3, pitch 2 to try to burn 5. But the way that it works is surprisingly consistent and oftentimes worth that big price, because you get to fix the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck before you try to burn for 5. Really, really interesting top end. We'll get into more details about it in a little bit, but let's start with level 0. Data Live's level 0 game is really strong. There are a lot of really solid plussing zeros, fixing zeros, and I think my favorite is this Confrontation with Humans Toka. 2 on-play abilities. First one, on play, we top check. If it's a character, add it to hand and pitch 1, and we can also on-play pitch a character to draw a card. Mills 2 fixes hand, gets rid of things that we don't need, can potentially add a climax with the draw. Just a really nice thing to throw down at level 0. If you've been here for a while, you know how much I love on-death effects. This Kotri, when it goes to waiting room, pitch 1, top check 4, add a level 1 to hand. It also gives another character 1000 power when it attacks, which is just enough to make sure that we get over in other lanes at 0. Helps us milk, gets our combo together, helps us keep board with that power. Just a really nice profile. We run yet another red 0. This card is an on-play drop salvage that gives 1000 power to a character when we use that ability, and we can also rearrange the top 2 cards of our deck. That part isn't quite as useful as it is in a standby build, because the only advantage that really gives us is that it can push a trigger down a little bit, just so we can pay it out more easily the next turn, as opposed to fixing when we get a standby trigger that we can play over something with. But more importantly, it's a pay 1, pitch 1 that goes to get something, and again, that tiny little bit of power helps us keep board at 0. This origami is the only green we run. We run 3 of it. It's a climax swapper on play, pay 1 to swap. This helps us loop our level 1 combo because we're running pants, so we can get climaxes back to hand. This helps us fix for that, and it also helps us set up our level 3 combo. It also has an on-play ability that lets us reveal our hand and neg our opponent's entire front row by 500 power. If we need a little bit of extra help getting over stuff, especially standby targets at level 1, this can help us get there. And then finally we run the Shido Itsuka. On-play Blink is already good in and of itself, but when you add the ability to pay 1 and sack itself to top check 4 and add a character, it makes this card so much easier to justify having in the deck. It gets rid of any effects that take place at the start of our opponent's turn. So anything off the level 1 combo for the Errands from AOT, the Megamines from Konosuba, the Riders from Fate, all of that stuff. It gets rid of Bounce Back on Oberos, it gets rid of Soul Walls. Really advantageous for us, very disruptive, and it can fix and pay out stock in a pinch. Excellent, excellent card. Level 1 is mostly about that combo that gets all of those cards into hand that we can then later use to pay out to make our combo happen. The Coterie is on a choice combo. It swings at 6,500 when we have the climax down and at least 2 other characters. On attack, top check, and if it's a character, we add it to hand, and we can do that twice. The only time this whiffs is if the top card is a climax, in which case we would immediately trigger and get a plus out of it anyway. It's really, really hard to miss with this combo. Really strong. Can mill us down anywhere from 6 to 9 cards pretty easily, while adding most of those to hand. If it weren't for the existence of 8 standby, doubtlessly this would be the go-to level 1 combo, and some people even run it with the standby top end with the Kurumi. Brandon talked about that in his Data Live deck tech, link in the description. But I love this combo. I think it's really strong, really effective, and it gets us the things that we need to make sure our level 3 game can pop off. The other benefit of running yellow at level 1 is that it makes it easier to play this, My Little Shido, a 1-0 event that might be the strongest card that they've ever printed in English. You can choose one of 3 different effects when you play this and rest a character. 1, look it up to 4, add a character. 2, level down an opponent's level 1 or higher character so that it goes to waiting room and our opponent has to put something from a lower level on stage. This gets rid of back row power. This gets rid of loopable combos. It gets rid of just any big thing that's annoying. We can immediately get rid of it just for playing a free event and tapping a character. Also, if our hand is too small at the end of the game, we can salvage a level 3. Just ridiculous what this card is capable of doing. It works really well in this deck. The rest of level 1 is mostly tech stuff, a Spring Moment Yoshino. It bombs early plays, and we can pay 1 to move it into a lane that our opponent is attacking us in with an early play. So ideally what we do is we set this bomb at level 1, leave it on field for our opponent's turn, and they have no choice but to lose one of their early plays because we can switch it at the start of their attack phase. It also bottom decks, which means that those early plays with hand encore won't stay on field. It's really disruptive and it's really hard to deny. I like this profile a lot. Next we run this 1-0 Toka. On play, it gains 2,000 power and can't side attack until the end of our opponent's next turn, which means that not only does it swing at 6-5, it also sits at 6-5 on our opponent's turn. It's a free level 1 that gets big enough to win lanes, and it's also big enough to be an actual pain to swing back into. It's just a solid piece that gives us more options. And finally, at level 1, this is a card that Brandon and I have been talking about a lot with each other over the past several months. It's actually a card from Fujimi Banco, but because it's an FDL card, it can be played with the Data Live stuff. Diva of Temptation Miku. This is a back row utility, and y'all know how much I love back row utility cards. This has 3 different abilities that are activated when it is rested. 1, we can rest it to grant a Celestial Spirit character 2,500 power. Unfortunately, our level 1 combo is not Celestial Spirit. However, our end game is, which means that we can push our level 3 game up to very high power levels just by resting a character in the back row. We can also rest and pitch one to bottom deck an opponent's cost 0 card. Again, denying cards that have lingering effects, like the Megamine combo. The Shizu combo in Slime can't go to memory if it gets bottom decked. Very useful disruption of our opponent's level 1 game. And then finally, we can rest and pay 2 to heal 1. That's an ability that can save us in a pinch if we're really desperate. I like this a lot. It has a ton of utility. We want to get one of these into our back row if we can, and then just leave it there for the duration of the game, because every turn it gives us something. Level 2 is mostly limited to tech. It's not very big. Mostly highlighted by the 2-2 Under the Azure Skies Toka. We run 2 of it, and it essentially plays as our early play. It gains 1,000 for each other character, so it sits at 10-5. Can get up to 13 with the help of the 1-1. When we get a reverse, we can rearrange the top 2 cards of our deck, so when we attack with this last, we can look at the top 2 cards of our deck, decide what we want to trigger. If there's a climax in there, we can guarantee a cancel at the start of our next turn, which is nice. It's a 2-soul, it gets pretty big, and it has some useful tech. This mostly helps us bridge the gap from level 1 to level 3 on board. Intensifying Battlefield Origami is a 1-of that kills level 3s. It gains 6,000 power if it's facing a level 3, so it swings at 12-5. Unfortunately, we can't give this power with the 1/1, but it's at least big enough to force our opponents to play their backup out of hand. It also has on attack pay 1 twin drive that lets it swing for more damage, potentially turning this into a 2 soul beater at level 2 for 1 that can also potentially kill a level 3. And then lastly, we run 1 copy of the Kurumi backup. It's a 2500 backup that also lets us refresh our deck for 2 stock when we play it. If we're in a jam and we're out a bunch of climaxes, instead of eating a bunch of damage, we can play this, pay the 2, get our climaxes from waiting room back into our deck. That's not something we're going to use a ton. It's mostly an emergency situation kind of thing. But having that kind of ability on a backup helps us keep board and also hopefully negate some damage. And then finally, level 3, the payoff cards. This combo is one of the most fun new combos I've seen in a while, and we have some other stuff that both supports it and gives us other options if we need it. Naive and Innocent Girl Toka is a 3/2 9000. It gains 500 for each other character, and it heals on play. The combo with the Pants Climax, on reverse, pay 3, pitch 2, move the Climax from board to waiting room. We put 3 cards from our opponent's waiting room of our choice on top of their deck and burn 5. A lot of caveats here, obviously. One of the big ones, we have to lose 5 cards in order to do this. We're paying 3 out of stock, 2 out of hand, just for the chance at burning 5. However, because we can fix the top 3 cards of our opponent's deck, we only need 2 clean cards from the top of their deck in order to stick 5 damage, which is a game-changing amount of damage and can turn a loss into a win and can potentially set us up to win a game even when our opponent is relatively early in level 2. The other key limitation is that this is an on-reverse combo. The card itself swings at 12 when it has a climax. We have some back row help that we're going to get to, as well as the 1/1 that can push us up over 16,000. So we have the capacity to get enough power to make this reverse more practical. And again, we only need 1 reverse, so we can choose our lane because we can only do this once because we move the climax from stage to waiting room, so we can't do this in multiple lanes anyway, so we can pick our lane, know where our opponent is most vulnerable, and then put all of our power into that lane and make sure we get our reverse. Obviously, there are a couple ways our opponents can stop this. They can stop the reverse by playing a backup and getting their lane bigger than ours. They could play a money counter, which we can't really do anything about, which is why I like to have 2 of these on board so that our opponent has to choose which lane they're going to lose in. Basically making sure that it's really, really hard for them to deny us all across the board. We also don't have to pay this cost until after we get the reverse, so it's not like we're paying the cost in advance and then getting shuttered by a backup or a money counter. The conditions are expensive and a little bit difficult, but with some attention, we can make sure that we get this reverse and get our swing. One of the cards that helps us do that is to save Spirit's Coterie. It's our 2000 assist in the back row. In addition to granting 2000 power, when we put it on field, we can choose an effect. We can look at 3, add 1, we can salvage a character from waiting room, or we can give each of our other characters +1 soul. If we feel like we can rush into a deck that isn't well compressed, we can do that. If we need to get a piece for our level 3 game, we can do that. If we need to dig for a climax or a climax swapper, we can do that too. Really, really useful card. Helps us in a lot of ways. It's also a 2 soul beater if we need it. And then finally at level 3, we have to play one of the best off finishers that the English game has to offer. The yellow 3 comboless Icy Tail Kurumi. On reverse, it kicks an opponent's character to memory, which is nice. It also heals us, sits at 10-5 when we have 2 or more characters, 12-5 with the back row, 13-5 with the back row, and a climax down. So decent size. We can get that memory kick pretty often. It's not too difficult to back up if we're swinging into a level 3 lane. But even if we don't get the reverse, we still get the Icy Tail, which is pay 1, pitch 3. It's a 5-card Icy Tail. We mill the bottom 5 cards out of our opponent's deck, and then burn them for X, X equal to the number of climaxes put into their waiting room. This is not usually the kind of effect that we're going to do alongside the combo. Usually we're going to use one or the other just because of the amount of resources we have. It's really hard to pitch 5 cards out of hand to make both of these go off. But this gives us another option if our climax isn't there, or if our opponent has shut down both of our combo lanes. This gives us more access to extra burn damage with the resources that we already have acquired. So what does the deck do well? Well, if Konosuba taught us anything over the past couple of years, it's that a burn 5 has the potential to completely flip a game on its head and do the kind of damage that can give us improbable victories. We also get a lot of plussing out of our level 1 combo. Running 8 plussing triggers is super nice. We're almost definitely going to have the cards in hand to do what we want to do with the endgame. We also have a lot of defense. We can deny our opponents their combos with our removal stuff, the blink. We can use bombs to get rid of our opponent's early plays. A lot of disruption in this list that can hopefully keep our opponent from doing what they want to do. Obviously, there are a couple of big glaring weaknesses in this. If we miss on the burn 5, that is kind of awful, because that's our primary way of really closing out a game. If we don't get that big swing, we're mostly looking at swinging with vanilla swings, which isn't great. It's not a super effective way to close out a game. While the odds of hitting that burn 5 are decently high, we will miss it a fair chunk of games, and if we miss it, that means we have to rely on vanilla swings to close games. We also don't have a lot going on at level 2. We mostly play defense at level 2. We can bomb things to open up lanes, hopefully use our removal stuff to keep our opponents from really controlling the board, but we don't have a ton of onboard presence at level 2. We also don't compress necessarily super well. There aren't any real natural compression tools. There's no memory compression, anything like that in this list. So it is definitely possible that if we get into a bad deck state and we don't have access to our 2-1 backup that can refresh us, we can take a pretty big hit. So the mid-game board is really straightforward, honestly. We want to combo in as many of those level 1 lanes as we can. Having the back row doesn't give power, again, to this front row, but what it does is it disrupts our opponent's ability to get lingering effects off with their combos, and it also can potentially clear lanes for us if we're under. At level 3, we really would love it if our board looks like this, with 2 of the Toka combos down, a Kurumi in the other lane, the back row Miku, and the back row Kotori to give us all of that power, help us pick our lanes, and make sure we get the reverse we want so that we know we can get our burn 5 off. As always, there are other options as well, mostly focusing on things that you would run in a optimized version of this list. There are definitely ways to bring this down to a true budget list. There's a Toka level 1 combo that's not bad, that's not as expensive as a lot of the other stuff. There are ways to bring the deck down to budget, but if we're looking to play an optimized version of the deck, there are still other cards that you might prefer in certain slots. There's a level 0 Kotori that when we play it, we reveal the top card. If it's a character, that card gains +2 soul, and then when it attacks, we can bounce something of ours back into hand, can potentially help us loop our level 1 combo specifically. I'm not a huge fan of it, mostly because it only lets us combo in 2 lanes, because that effect only works when we attack with this card. However, it does let us loop, it gets a playable back into our hand, and it can consistently swing for high amounts of damage, usually into our opponent's first deck. There's also a blue Climax pitch at level 0. Pitch a Climax, salvage a character, and when this card's attack cancels, we can put it in stock. Stock gen is great. The Climax pitch I don't think is as useful in this list because we have the Climax swapper, and if we can loop the level 1, we want to. So we don't have as much of a desire to pitch Climaxes in this list as we might in others. Still, really neat tech. Climax pitch salvage is definitely useful, and the chance that it could potentially go to stock, because we really don't have a way to generate extra stock in this list. Data Life has a handful of Brainstormers, most of which are pretty decent. This one is my favorite, mostly because it's functionally a 5-card Brainstormer. We can surveil at the start of main phase, so we can look at the top card and either leave it on top or put it in waiting room, essentially giving us access to a 5-card Brainstormer. However, if we hit that Brainstormer, we draw, which is usually not considered to be as strong as Salvage Research. All of the Brainstormers kind of have some give and take. This one's my favorite, mostly just because it's more likely to hit, and I would rather focus on getting cards into hand more consistently than having a higher whiff chance but being able to get something more specific. But again, all of the Brainstormers in this set are fine. I don't really love any of them in this list, to be honest. Brainstormers feel like they're losing a lot of their value as the meta progresses because we have better, more consistent ways of getting cards into hand. And there's just other stuff I would rather have in this list at 0. If you want to do something really funky with this, you can run the 1-1 event. On play, pay 1, send your entire hand to waiting room, and then draw cards equal to the hand that you had before discarding +1. So replacing the event and all of the cards that you pitched for the cost of 1. If you're real desperate for mill, this mills, and it also completely refreshes your hand. So you don't know what you're going to get. You don't get to keep any of the stuff in your hand you might have wanted. It's a crapshoot, but if that sounds like fun, then by all means, run it. You can get this off of the On Death Top Check and the level 1 combo, so you can get it into hand. If you like it, sure, why not? So this is the list as I have it. Again, currently comes out to close to $300. I really do anticipate that that number is going to drop. I don't think that the Kojiri combo is going to stay at $20 a pop, just because I don't think too many people are playing it. I think a lot of those level zeros that you see in a lot of the decks are going to come down a little bit as well, just because there are so many of them out there with so much product being opened. The rest of the deck isn't bad, and realistically, if you wanted to build this on a budget, focused more on the blue Toka stuff, and if you wanted to run this without the top level 0 stuff, and without the Icy Tail Kurumi, you could very easily make this a much more budget-friendly option, probably well under $100 at that point. But again, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see the deck as is drop below $250, even $200 in the coming months. As more and more product gets opened, more of this stuff hits the secondary market. And again, a lot of this stuff, especially like the yellow and blue stuff, isn't getting a lot of play, so that's going to be available, and it's going to be mostly pretty inexpensive. So depending on how you want to play this, or what you have access to, depending on how many boxes you bought, or if you bought a playset or whatever, or if you're willing to move things around between your 8 standby and this, or if you just want to buy this on its own because you think it looks like fun and you want to buy a budget version of this, there are definitely several ways to go about having this or getting it, but I don't think it's going to be this expensive for too long. So that's all I've got. Thank you for joining me for this. Hopefully, if you bought into Data Live, now you've got something else to build that isn't 8 standby. If you're sitting there with hundreds of cards that you didn't have any plans for, there you go. You've got another deck that you can build that is fun and decently competitive. In any case, hopefully this was interesting and potentially useful. We will be back on Thursday with gameplay of this deck. Next Tuesday, an actual Clock Talk. Now that I've got my technology stuff sorted out, we will have a Clock Talk on Tuesday, and then 5 cards, 5 minutes for Magia Record the following Thursday. So we have some good stuff coming up. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, have a good one.